there is a through line. Well, there's a few through lines. One of them, though, from the Powell Memo through the entirety of the Heritage Foundation, through the overturning of the Fairness Doctrine, all the way up to Citizens United and the subsequent lawsuits. And that one through line is that corporations should be treated like individuals. That's massive, right? The other through line that we can see even today, right now, with the government shutdown, October 29th, 2025, is also trying to gut this administrative state. And Russ Vought, the current architect of Project 2025, who is like in the administration now, he has said that numerous times. He has said that he wants to gut the administrative state, right? And since the 80s and 90s, they've wanted to overturn those anti-discrimination laws. They finally got to it, right? We know by 1980, Paul Weyrich says that he doesn't want every single American to vote. It doesn't work in his favor. And we've only worked through mandates 1 through 3. And now we have to take a fucking break and we have to look at actually some of these results, right? Because I've given you a lot of facts, I've given you figures, but to understand why we are where we are today, you actually have to understand how it affected everything, right? Because just through 1/3 of the mandates, I'll remind you, Project 2025 is the 9th mandate. We got a lot to fucking cover. This is the, I guess, 4th video in the Heritage Foundation series I'm doing here on Patreon, right? And it is October 29th. Project 2025 is the direct reason for the government shutdowns right now. But we have to talk about those 12 years in the 80s and the early 90s, which is both of the Reagan administrations and the Bush singular administration. So we talked about the deregulation that led to the savings and loans crisis, right? But in reality, this deregulation and this idea of deregulation is going to continue. It's going to push forward, even though that exact crisis cost the American people well over $100 billion for a bailout. The Heritage Foundation and Ronald Reagan, both his administrations, and George H.W. Bush, and eventually Clinton will also all believe and firmly stand behind deregulation. They'll just say that the savings and loan crisis was just like it was a blip. We did it wrong. But in reality, we will pay out so many more bailouts for industry as we deregulate. And this will also set the scene for some of these massive monopolies that we see today. And some of them are very hidden and well constructed, and you don't even know that they exist. And that's kind of the point. I think one of the bigger ones will be, of course, the 1996 Telecommunications Act that deregulates telecommunications. But we'll talk about that when we get there. In 1981, the air traffic controllers go on an illegal strike. I'm putting illegal in air quotes because federal workers are not allowed to strike. This is going to change the nature of labor relations in this country. It's not so much about the strike, but it's about the fact that Reagan responded quickly and he fired 11,000 of them. To this day, we still feel some of those shortages, and it's the way that labor movements move forward from this, right? When unions go on strike and they want to negotiate with their employers, which is the point of unions, a lot of employers looked to the federal government and said, hey, well, he fired them. Why can't we? It's like if the NFL changed a rule, it would trickle down through college and high school and middle school and Pee Wee really fucking quickly, right? The Heritage Foundation never put out a memo on the PATCO strike, and that is the Air Traffic Controllers Union, but they were very, very, very pro being able to fire federal workers whenever they want, right? Part of Project 2025 today specifically is Section F, which is making it easier to fire federal workers, making them at-will workers so you can fire them for any which reason. We talked about the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine being overturned is a massive thing that we feel today. This leads to our 24-hour news cycle. This leads to our very, very, very partisan news organizations like Fox News, OAN, Breitbart, MSNBC. All of these corporations can lean whichever way they want because of the overturning of the Fairness Doctrine. And this also leads to the rise of large radio stars like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and people that are like a direct entry point into Fox News who are talking heads to this day, right? Even Bill O'Reilly started his career in the radio world after the Fairness Doctrine was overturned. The current wealth gap that we see today starts in the 80s, right? Because the progressive wealth tax and the tax on the highest earners in the United States drops drastically drastically, right? And that's the point. They want to reduce the federal government. They want to lower the amount that people are giving to the federal government. And that's where it starts, right? Ironically, because of this, the deficit fucking balloons, right? Under Reagan, the deficit goes apeshit bonkers crazy. And that's kind of a cycle we'll see, is that a Republican will come into office, deficit and the debt will go up, and then a Democrat will show up and try to even it out the best they can. And that will be a cycle that we see until Trump's first term. Now, in Trump's second term, we've seen our deficit increase by like $1 trillion, I think, in the last 9 months. This is also going to change the way that CEOs compensate, how companies compensate CEOs, right? Due in part to finding these different ways to get taxed less. And also, like, there'll be a rebate that's allowed for corporations for their C-suite compensation. That's up to $1 million per year. So there will be times where corporations literally get tax breaks because they did poorly that year. And they've got so many people in the C-suite that they have to fucking pay, and they get tax deductions for it. This is where it all starts. And this is how we start to see this, especially with that 1981 tax bill that Reagan puts through, which is like to the letter what the Heritage Foundation wanted. Aside from World War II, this is when our Department of Defense budget starts to go up and up and up and up and up, right? This is where it starts. This is where it starts. Also in 1984, the Heritage Foundation hires someone who actually crafts the message around welfare, right? We're having a big conversation this week and every other week that the government is shut down around SNAP benefits. And the term welfare queen comes from Ronald Reagan, but the idea to add work requirements for any sort of government assistance comes from the Heritage Foundation, specifically from their like welfare architect. And that technically isn't going to hit until like the 90s, but they've been working on that since well before the 80s, right? They are a group that coins the term the like welfare state and calls FDR the welfare president. Some of the other major pieces of legislation that we haven't really touched too much on is the war on drugs, and this starts under George H.W. Bush. The 80s is a decade of private prisons, and while private prisons don't make up as much of our prison population anymore, these are the people, the companies started in the 80s, are the ones who are doing the ICE detention centers. Core Civic starts then, right? I believe the GEO group starts then as well. The Heritage Foundation doesn't talk much about private prisons. They do have a very hard line stance on zero tolerance around drugs. And again, any sort of welfare programs that might help people get off of drugs. They're very anti-welfare, anti-discrimination. It's, talking about these people so much has been, thinking about these people so much has made me just want to vomit. I don't want to talk about them anymore, but we have to, because literally every single thing that's happening right now, whether it is corporations not paying their fair share in taxes, whether it is the demonization of people who are on welfare, whether it is the radicalization of young men and young women, that's all coming from the Powell Memo. That's all coming from the Heritage Foundation. That's all been in the works for over 45 years. And I wish I could tell you there was a way to easily turn it off, but there's not, right? One of the big things that is holding on forever from the Reagan era is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, among other courts, by the way, right? Because with Ronald Reagan, his 2 terms, he's going to appoint somewhere around 400 judges. I think maybe over 400, close to 400, right? 10 of them are still in circulation working, right? On the Supreme Court, he makes William Rehnquist the Chief Justice. Anthony Kennedy, Antonin Scalia, and Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman on the Supreme Court, all come in under Reagan's tutelage, right? They're going to all be there for Bush versus Gore in 2000. Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 96, right? Both Rehnquist and O'Connor will retire during baby Bush's admin, but Scalia and Kennedy will be there for Heller in 08 and Citizens United in 12. and Obergefell. They are on the court from the 80s through 2015. And then, of course, with George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., Daddy Bush, he only gets one Supreme Court justice, and that's Clarence fucking Thomas. Clarence fucking Thomas. Daddy Bush is gonna put up like 200 people into the federal courts, judges, right? And when the last election was happening, people kept telling me that Project 2025 was already happening. And the reason it was already happening is because in Trump's first term, he appointed so many federal judges. Even though he didn't have the organization and the construction behind him that Project 2025 has created, this like administrative shitstorm. He didn't have that, right? But what he did do is appoint a shit ton of judges. And a lot of the cases that we hear that are super important to our day-to-day life don't ever make it to the Supreme Court because they find a pleasant judge that they want in the Court of Appeals or the district or something else. So this Rehnquist court is probably one of the more conservative courts of the 20th century, right? Nothing like John Roberts, though. John Roberts, our current court master, Supreme Court Chief Justice, he is much more conservative, obviously. There's so much more coming out of the Heritage Foundation. I just can't fucking keep digging into it. I'm going crazy. And we still have mandates 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to get through. Project 2025 is a behemoth. And it probably, in my mind, rivals what the very first mandate for leadership was, with a twist. The twist is this. It's not about conservative leadership. It's about a conservative country. I'm fucking worried.